Welcome to the 12th station. I'm Jim Maughan. I'm with my good friend, Mr. Bug Hall.
Howdy, y'all.
Hey, Bug, you and I have talked about this, and frankly, it's patently obvious. Um, there's been a real sort of we've turned away from physical fitness. Men have become less physically fit. Actually, so much so, I'll talk about this a little later in terms of my outline of facts. So much so that the Army has called it a problem in terms of combat readiness with recruits, national security. I mean, there's a whole bunch of reasons, and we really have become weaker as men physically. It's
hmm
not a small point. Uh,
No, so
yeah.
yeah, the reality is the body conforms to the operations of the soul. So that's an important principle.
Yes.
Um, we often put that principle against the importance of physical activity, right? Because the other principle is that it's through the faculties of the body that the soul operates. So a healthy body, a healthy mind, right? The mind is the immaterial part, but the brain is physical, and the mind operates through the brain. So if you don't have the proper chemical balances going on with the endorphins and all of those things uh, will actually contribute to a richer spiritual life because your soul will operate better. Um, we live in a society of Netflix and chill, right? It's a very lethargic society. Physical activity. Most people do not have physical jobs. I mean, that was me for most of my life.
Sure.
And when I converted, I first went and lived in the desert for about 6 months,
Right.
and I certainly wasn't very physically active, right? But I was dealing with the cold and dealing. It actually gets really cold at night in the desert. There was
Sure.
a certain asceticism, subjecting my body. But then what I came to in the desert was that I wanted to go home and get to know my family better. My brother worked on a large production ranch on the construction crew, and I spent about a year just working side by side with my brother on that crew. And man, it did so much for my spiritual life. The hard physical labor that I had done in small spurts, right?
Yes.
I had helped people with things, and my dad was always very keen on keeping me active, and he's a big physically fit kind of guy. So I did those things, but working every day with my hands in very, very physically grueling conditions, um, my thoughts just began to really crystallize and to clarify things. I began to clarify things much easier, and I attribute that to the physical activity. It was the physical activity, I think, that really did that. Um, as per usual, why don't you give us the facts, Mr. Mon, and
That's
dive in?
you got it, Bug. You came up with this topic, and I absolutely loved it because internally you could see this was obvious. Do you know what I mean? You could see it both, in young men, and certainly men at my age. They're falling apart. I mean, and I kind of like I just did a. I'm not going to overwhelm you guys with a bunch of data because I think this is really sort of self-effacing. But the Center for Disease Control and Prevention report that 70% of men are overweight or obese in the United States. Now, obese men, this is not a small point, tend to have lower testosterone. If you have not noticed, testosterone levels in men have dropped to unprecedented levels. The average testosterone level of a 40-year-old man in 1987 versus 2017 dropped 30%. As I mentioned earlier, even the United States Army has stated obesity and general physical fitness is a problem in new recruits. So much so, the Army maintains that it's affecting national security and combat readiness. The current society has made us weaker. There is no question about it. You said it earlier, Netflix and chill. Modern civilization, food availability, and by the way, simple carbohydrates, not a small point, everywhere, right? Entertainment sources lead to lethargy. $10 a month, and you can have all the crap you want on Netflix. Lack of physical exercise, et cetera, et cetera. It seems men are becoming less male, and they're failing. I mean, this is not an overstatement. No one seems to be noticing. Certainly not the news. So, I guess what we're trying to do here we're trying to, and Bug and I, we're trying to get men to understand the problem, and internalize the fact that, like many problems, and the fact that we're men and no one's really going to help you with it, and you better understand it and fix it yourself.
Yeah, and like all the topics we touch on, it can be a little overwhelming, right?
Yes.
Because there's a big debate. Is your physical fitness more related to physical activity, or is it more related to what you eat, right? The
Yes.
reality is it's both. It's both and. We, a very very long time ago, we got some false information. This food pyramid, where you're supposed to eat
Complete fiction.
it's complete fiction.
It's unbelievable. And by the way, just as a side note, Bug, I don't mean to interrupt, this is really important. The FDA, who's on the board of the FDA? The basis of the food pyramid is a who's who. Grains, wheat, like just
Yeah.
go look
Yeah.
rather than me. Just go
Well,
ahead.
the guy that invented that, by the way, it was like 50 years later that they dug into his notes and found that he intentionally falsified his data. You can look into that. Look into the history of the healthy heart symbol that you see on like cereal boxes and stuff. It's pretty shocking how that came about.
It is really shocking. If we could just, because I think this is really relevant, if we could for a second, because there's a couple, we didn't even talk about this before the show. You jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. You start off with the Nixon administration and Earl Butz. They were like, why are we giving farmers subsidy? Let's just grow a bunch of corn. They turned it into high fructose corn syrup. They threw it everywhere. Okay, that
Yeah.
was the first step. The second one was, this is interesting. Now we talk about the food industry. After George McGovern ran for president, he noticed in the late 1970s he lost, and as a gift to the American people, he kind of decided that he was going to, enact a study to determine why we're so. It seemed to him as he traveled around the country, we were becoming a fatter nation. Well, what did the food industry do? They took that information, they twisted it to make everything low fat. So now
Right.
you have complex. We have rather simple carbohydrates, the worst thing in the world for you. They take the fat out, which is actually good, and now they put in more sugar. That's a recipe for diabetes, cancer, and heart disease. And diabetes and heart disease are paper tigers that shouldn't exist. Type 2 diabetes, not the one when you're born with, right? And that's exploding.
Yeah.
That's an explode. But go take it from there. And I think I missed a couple things, so pick it up.
I had recognized the benefit of physical activity really early on. And I was always relatively active. I trained for a boxing movie at one point and was training 8 hours a day. So, physical activity was something I was accustomed to. When I was living out in the desert, though, there was a convent of nuns kind of close to me, and they're like a self-sufficient convent. They're way out in the country. They have cows, and I would go out there a few times a week and bale hay for them and just do all the physical stuff that I didn't like to think of, little old nuns having to do, right?
Right.
And that was something that really really benefited me quite a bit, just the physical activity of it. But it wasn't until years later, because I was never real big on diet thoughts. In fact, I was so opposed to it because of growing up in Hollywood and seeing all the ridiculousness of everyone's on a diet all the time. I completely rejected the idea that thinking about what you eat at all should be something you're doing. It wasn't until I started fasting every day. And my diet was just all over the place. I just ate whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. 90% of what I ate was processed fast food, and I was single far too late in life. So my favorite meal is still ramen noodles and Doritos, right? But
you can't get worse than that, right?
that's my comfort food. But it wasn't until I started fasting every day that after a couple months of that, I had this overwhelming craving for beef, just red meat, and
Sure.
I had the good wherewithal to just follow that and say, obviously we're not supposed to just follow our cravings, but I thought my body was probably trying to tell me something, and I just naturally, without doing any research, I cut everything out and was mostly eating red meat for about a year straight. Man, I was shooting out of bed in the morning. My thoughts were just so clear. I was able to focus far better than I ever had before. And I found that even my desire to fulfill my duties kind of skyrocketed as well. Just that joie de guerre, right? that joy for the fight, for the war of life as a man.
Wow.
suddenly just hit home. And I do really attribute that to my diet change. I'll tell an anecdotal story real quick.
Please.
I've got a buddy who was a vegan for I think 8 years, and it was for perceived moral reasons, right? He well, perceived and real moral reasons, because the reality is that the animal industry today, where we get our food from today, is egregiously in error, right?
Yes.
The large chicken farms, where half of them have broken legs and are scrounging around on the ground, living in their own filth. Like, there is a very, very real problem with that. But as he was entering deeper into his reversion to the faith, he recognized the very real truth that God made all of these animals for our consumption. And when I was slaughtering my first cow, he wanted to participate. He hadn't eaten meat in 8 years, and he said, "I want to come learn. I know you're learning, and I want to be there with you. Can I come?" And so he was with me through that whole process. Um, we put the cow down together, and we skinned it and we butchered it. Um, and I sent him home with a mountain of meat, and said, "Hey," I said, he said, "I want to kind of get into this slowly." I said, "Hey, can you do me a favor, just as an experiment, have meat every day, just for a little while, and let's just kind of track the data on it." He said within a week he felt 15 years younger. Uh,
Really?
yeah, he was immediately affected by the diet change. He was eating meat every morning, first thing in the morning, red meat, and all of a sudden he was like just flying through life. And it was really cool to see, because that was my experience. It was really cool to see someone else have that same experience. So yeah, so diet plays a big part, man. It plays a big part in testosterone levels.
Sure. Can I back up on diet for a second? Because
Yeah,
this is a really key point. It's like we're not registered dietitians, any of that stuff. But listen, we're common sense, right? And so the thing is, right? But correct me if I'm wrong on this, right? Because I love what you said about meat. There has this been, and by the way, grass-fed beef is the best, right?
right. Well,
Right.
because there's all the micronutrients in it, and all of
Bingo.
that.
There's
Again, I'm not a dietitian, but I'm kind of learning now
sure.
far more than I ever had. Yeah.
Yeah, or game like deer hunting. That's grass fed, higher in omega threes than sixes. It's a great point, but it is important stuff. But the basic thing is, grass fed beef, or very very good vegetables, right? Particularly leafy greens. Stay away is just stay away from simple carbohydrates. Just avoid that. If you're gonna have bread, have sprouted grains or that kind of thing. Basic, right, Bug? And frankly, fasting is not a bad idea.
What I really do believe, that if more men were fasting regularly, and I mean regularly, like our ancestors did, right? So
Yes.
no food until 4 p.m. or so. Pick a time, set it. Do it a couple times a week for a while, or dive all the way in like I did, because I had a real difficulty in taking the first step. And I am a bit of an extremist. So when I finally did take the first step, I went straight to fasting every day. And I had this priest kind of tell me, he was like, "You're not going to die." He's like, you won't do it, because you start getting the headaches and you start worrying. And then it's worry, it's fear that's preventing you. He said, "Just dive in, man. You'll make it. I promise."
You're not
Uh,
going to. I promise you,
and
you're going to make it. People have been doing this for years. It's good for you. And,
yeah,
and go ahead, man.
but
Sorry.
what I wanted to say is, I truly believe that if men were doing that, the natural cues that their body would be telling them would start to kick in. They would start to. I actually started to get a repulsion towards sugar, right?
Yes.
Now I still do have quite a sweet tooth. I'll say that.
Yeah.
But my body was really rejects sugar now, right? Because, by the way, when you're fasting and you take in sugar, it just wreaks havoc on your system. And it
There.
got to the point where it's hard for me to even stomach,
That's
uh,
right.
simple sugars and things like that.
Look, I got to ask you because this is a really key point. It's everywhere. They put it in every
Yeah,
processed food there is. Yeah, I can think of no greater enemy to your physical health than sugar. It destroys. It's a leading cause of diabetes, type 2 diabetes. It's a leading cause. It feeds cancer.
yeah.
Right. I'm sorry. It really
No, it's food for cancer. It
it's food for
absolutely.
cancer. And
Well, the funny thing is I'm still not one of those guys that looks at the back of boxes or whatever
sure,
when I'm eating food. Like we eat mostly what we have at our house now. What we produce ourselves.
sure.
Um, but I immediately know when something is heavily processed or if there's sugar in it just by eating it. And usually don't buy it again if that's the case because I eat it and for the next day I feel like trash. So if you're listening to your body, I don't think everyone needs to be highly educated in all the words you can't pronounce on the back of the box. If you're fasting somewhat frequently, and your body will give you the cues of what it needs, right? So there's that the diet aspect, but then physical fitness. Physical fitness is something that I think my personal opinion. I don't have anything to back this up except my observations on the teachings of the faith.
Sure.
Uh, you know, we we've talked about this before. The solution to the fall of man in the garden is to toil, right, in sweat and tears, and to bring about thorns and thistles, right? Like that's it's the hard labor and the arduous task of bringing about some sort of product, right? That really is the medicine for our fallen nature. I think because you start to see this with a lot of guys that are beginning to embrace virtue, is they suddenly have a desire to exercise, right? Now, that's good. I'm not besmirching the gym thing and all
Sure.
that,
Sure. They
but
may have to because they don't live in the country and that
right,
kind of thing. Yeah.
it is, I think, a replacement for hard physical labor,
That's right.
right? I think it is lower in the order of it's a lower ordered good than working really hard. And I think it's interesting too that what do they call that? CrossFit. CrossFit has become really popular. It kind of emulates physical labor better than maybe lifting weights or sort of classical gym type exercises.
Sure.
And I think there's a reason that it's really taking off. I think we all have a desire for the medicine that's good for us. And you can, by the way, you can do that. You can find ways, even if you have an office job, you can find a convent of nuns that might need help baling hay. You can find those things. If you can't, then you get the gym culture. Now, here's my take on that. And my take on the gym culture is this, and I think this is very important because I think it's really rampant. I do think a lot of what drives that culture is vanity. That's my own observation. Is like with any good, there is almost always a lingering defect hiding behind it, right?
It's a great point.
Well, I mean, for instance,
Sure.
I embrace quite a few ascetic aspects of the faith. And I would always get this caution from people. They would say, well, just be careful. Make sure spiritual pride isn't behind this. And I kind of appropriated that for a while, and then I eventually kicked that out as a temptation, because if your problem, if doing any spiritual penance of any sort promotes spiritual pride in you, the spiritual pride doesn't go away when you stop doing that activity, right? The spiritual pride is there. That's the point. It's part of you. Doing the activity while also recognizing that spiritual pride is a problem means you're going to actually work on spiritual pride too. And so,
Great point.
what I would say is for those who the gym is their only means of good, strong physical activity, because man, what that does to your brain is crucial.
Sure.
If that's what you have available to you, man, you better get in there and get your swole on, right? But you got to watch the pride, right? Because you see these the sort of the modern Stoic thing,
Sure.
right? And the modern Stoic thing, what I find is I start to see a lot of selfies and shirtless selfies, especially. And you start to go, well, what's your motive here? Don't stop going to the gym because vanity might be an issue. Keep going to the gym and be very, very keen, right? Do your examination, recognize where the vanity is cropping up, and start attacking that just as avidly as you're attacking your lethargy, right? You're attacking the softness of your body. You have to attack the spiritual side as well.
Wow. Yeah, you nailed that. And you just reminded me of that too. I like what you said about CrossFit too. What's interesting is and I don't think people have really keyed in on this. If you look at the exercise regimens of CrossFit, they're very little to do with weights, and actually a lot to do with a replication of some sort of like farm work or
Right.
something like that.
Well, that was my own observation.
Yeah, I agree with you. But go ahead. Yeah.
When I got on my farm, when I started my homestead, I was in decent shape. I mean, like
Yes.
I said, I was always relatively active, but there was one task. It was a daily task because I have to move my cow paddocks every day. I have a rotational grazing system because I only have 3 acres. And so
Right. Right.
in order
Right.
to maximize my grass, I have to keep moving the cows. So the grass is growing back and they're rotating around. Part of that process is that I have to put 3 grounding rods in for my electric fences, and they're 6 foot. So I have to hammer them in 6 feet. And then every day I have to pull 6 feet worth of steel rods out of the ground. When I first started doing that, I could not physically pull them out with my hands.
Wow.
I had to get a pipe wrench, and put it down at the bottom for leverage. And then even then, it would take me a few minutes to work these 6 foot rods out of the ground. And they're maybe 3/4 of an inch, in diameter. So I mean, it would be a task for, I think, most people. Um, Within a year, I can pull those rods out by hand in a matter of seconds. I mean,
Really?
I grab hold of them and
Sure.
they come right out. And one day I just realized that. I was like,
Wow.
I thought back to when I was first doing it. And I was like, man, I've grown in strength. Now, here's the thing. I think what CrossFit emulates really well is that very multifaceted type of exercise that you get in farm work, because I use every muscle in my body in some way during the day, right? I mean, it's this very broad sense of exercise, and we know now, because we study this stuff. We know now that we have all sorts of different muscles. We've got the short twitch muscles, and we've
Sure.
got the things for the strength muscles. We've got all this different stuff, and classical exercise, which I'm not besmirching at all, because I think all exercise is good. Do what you do.
Yes.
Uh, but that tends to be very localized, or at least far more localized than
100%. By their very nature, they miss the ancillary muscles that a CrossFit or farm work will naturally incorporate. There's no question,
yeah,
right?
yeah. The benefit, by the way, of and this is what people that know this stuff tell me. The benefit of the strength training, the heavy weightlifting, is more of the chemical aspect in the brain, right? You do get much more of the dopamine and the various positive chemicals in the brain. I think kick in a lot stronger, from what I've heard, at least.
Yeah, yeah. The endorphins or
Right.
whatever that is. Yeah, the physiology that I'm not exactly certain of. But excuse me, I was going to ask you. I'm dying to get to the part, our favorite part of the solutions of this, because I think one of the biggest problems I see is that people don't understand the spiritual necessity of this, of masculinity and fortitude.
Yeah.
To if you're okay, and if so, anyway, I wanted to save that for a second. So, with your permission here, I was going to say it's that time. That's the dive signal, Bug.
There it is.
So, can I lead off? Because and then I want you to
Please.
pick it up, because there are two elements to this, right? I see it all the time, and you and I have talked, and I too worked indoors for years. I what I noticed was this is not the way we're supposed to live, and there's a
Right.
spiritual element to this. And I'm telling you, whether it be CrossFit or whatever, you work in the city, you don't need anything. You know why? Because there's first of all, you can run, you can jump, you can do push-ups, you can do sit-ups, and you got to incorporate that on a daily basis. Why? This isn't vanity. This is sanity.
Yep.
This is you cannot. We're not meant to sit under artificial lights all day and without recognizing that. Get up in the morning, and I have to tell you, and I was very blessed to have a father who did this when nobody else did in the 1970s. He got up and ran, and I used to run with him. And it's something I incorporated my whole life. And he would, on his off days, he would lift weights. You know, he's a policeman and that kind of thing. And what a blessing that was to have that example. And I mean, every day people used to laugh at him. You know, he's like, "What are you, crazy?" You know. And but the the second thing I wanted to bring up and then give it to you is the hero's journey. You going out to the desert, embracing discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
It's a clarion call of masculinity to take that journey at some point. I'm really moved by your story, and I want you to go into it, but I want to add my own. For me, it was the Camino de Santiago in Spain. I walked across Spain. It was 32 days. My feet got destroyed and that kind of thing. And in many respects, wasn't a tough technical hike. Anyone who's ever done the Adirondacks, you know, knows a tough hike where, you know, you could break your ankle every step.
Mm-hmm.
Nah, this was paved. This was easy. It was just a question of fortitude. But I would argue, and if you could pick this up, this is what we're missing. The hero's journey, the call to masculinity. You went into the middle of the desert, built a fire, got a cot, and you know, like, it's not a small point. And then went down the road to help nuns bale hay or whatever it had to be done. I decided to walk across Spain. I was looking for discomfort. I was looking for the ability to challenge myself and pray.
Yeah.
Through even the founder of Opus Dei was a big believer in that. Through hard work, that's a form of prayer. You know, Saint Jose Maria.
Yeah, well, and you know, Saint Benedict before him,
Yep,
right?
Yep.
I mean, that's always been instrumental to men in the faith. I mean, the first desert fathers, the first monastics.
Oh, great point.
When they went out to the desert, their reasoning was precisely that, you know, Rome had now legalized Christianity, and all of the Christians who had a deep struggle for a very long time suddenly didn't have that struggle. They were allowed to own property. They were allowed to enter into the economic system more freely in Rome. And ease and comfort immediately started to permeate through Christian culture at the time. And the monastics said, wait, we're supposed to subjugate our bodies. We're supposed to have hard things. What can we do now? Where's the fight? And they went out to the desert and they found their fight. And they made saints of themselves, right? By participating in our Lord's grace. That is the key here. And look, it can be anything. This is the important part but we have to recognize the principle that subjugating our bodies, doing the arduous, growing in fortitude, it's crucial.
Yes.
Crucial, by the way, that word comes from the cross, right? And it really is. It's absolutely imperative that we embrace the cross and find it. If our lives are too easy, we need to go find our crosses, and beware of anyone that tries to talk you out of that, right? Because I got it, man. You know, all the Hollywood Catholics, you know, were constantly telling me, "You're crazy. Oh, you know, you're going too hard on this. Don't do spiritual penances that are, you know, really difficult. We don't do that anymore. That's not something we do. And it's dangerous. You know what? It's dangerous to the devil. That's it.
That's who it's dangerous to.
That's who it's dangerous to. Challenge yourself. And by the way, just on a natural level, right? Put soteriology and sanctification aside. On a natural level, men have a deep desire to be challenged. And if they are not being challenged, they need to challenge themselves. I had a buddy who lived a very easy life, and his spiritual director one year for Lent said, because I used to do these 3-day survival trips. I would go out.
Oh, wow.
I've done that most of my life. Just because you come home feeling like you can accomplish anything.
That's right.
You do it because it's scary. That's the point. Right. And people go, well, aren't you scared out there for 3 days? Yeah, that's the point. The point is you go do it because it's scary. Well, his spiritual director knew me, and this friend of mine was always making fun of me for that. What are you going to go out there and be a survivalist? And, you're just playing Rambo. Well, his spiritual director gave him that as a penance for Lent. Said one of the things you have to do this Lent is you have to go. He had never camped, not a day in his life. He said one of the things you have to do is you have to go do an overnight survival trip in the woods. And I had to chuckle at that, but this spiritual director got the point. The
Yes.
point of what we are. Quid es. What are we? Right?
Yes.
We're made for greatness, and you got to find your challenge, right? And so if it's weightlifting, and seeing how much more you can lift week by week, right? Setting some bar and attaining it, and pushing through, persevering through the suffering. If
Yes.
it's, whatever it is, we actually do need that. It's not optional.
If I could, Bug, if I could drill down on your story for a second, because I think yours is particularly powerful. To offer some context, here you are, young, good-looking guy in Hollywood, world at your feet, really, to a certain, quite honestly. I'm not trying to embarrass you. I'm just saying there were opportunities of sin everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So what do? You ditch your phone, you grab a cot, build a fire, and you go out into the desert for 6 months with books.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. Okay.
Yeah, well, and my goal wasn't actually suffering. My goal was because I did always love the Desert Fathers. I did always love that aspect of the faith. My main goal was to avoid sin. It's really hard to sin alone in the desert with no phone reception, right? The late night phone calls and texts just aren't going to be coming in. And even if one did slip through, somehow I got a moment of reception. It's a 2.5 hour drive back to Los Angeles, right? So, that was the main goal. And then the suffering became a great joy because I just started to see the change, the effect of it. Right? I started to see that praying was easier, and that our connection to God is. Look, we're dissipated by all the easy things. Our souls are dissipated, right? That's an old term that doesn't get used very much anymore. But the dissipation of the soul is a real danger to our spiritual lives.
Sure.
And through suffering, we recollect ourselves, and it's just so important.
And by the way, that's the purpose of taking time out to fast, is to separate yourself from the world and your body, thereby offering a clear connection to Christ. And I would argue that's precisely that subconscious call you were feeling. And I find it kind of wild that you and I both did this without knowing each other. And there are other people who do this kind of thing where as they got kind of tuned in, they just said, I got to go. I don't know where that is, but where I'm going is not, I hate to use the term, but maybe the hero's journey would be appropriate. But it's like, I got to go because the noise of the world is something, and I think God's really whispering heavily. And I really have to go, and I have to find whatever it is he's trying to tell me. And I'm sorry, that's not crazy. It's not, man. Go take it.
So when I was training for that boxing movie, I was doing 8 hours of training a day. It was 3 hours of boxing in the morning. Then it was 2 hours of weight training because I had to put on 60 pounds, I think, of muscle.
You're kidding.
Yeah, I had to bulk up. I was eating some insane. I don't remember the calorie count, but I had to wake up in the middle of the night and drink a protein shake just to meet my calorie count every day.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a big undertaking for me.
Yeah,
that was the first moment, and that was only a few months after I first got sober. That was the first time I ever really had any clarity in my life. I remember, and it came from, you touched on silence. There was an interior silence for the first time in my life. There was a tranquility, and I wasn't a convert at all by that point. I wasn't a Christian. I wasn't anything. But I remember just having a quietness. And classically, when they talk about silence, holy silence, it's not the absence of noise, right? Silence is more
internal.
It's an internal. It's a deep soil in the soul from which from which the good, the virtue can grow, right? Prayer can grow, all these things. Um, it's you can have silence in the heart of Rome, right? You can have interior silence in the middle of a traffic jam, but I think subjugating the body is the first step in attaining any kind of interior
Yes,
silence.
that's right. Right. And it's so the while what you just said, it's so incredibly countercultural.
Yeah,
Right. But I find it really funny because yet people I know and you and me, unbeknownst to each other, answered that call. We answered that call. It was like we're
a lot of
going
men
to.
are. A lot of men are. I mean, that's the modern Stoic movement, right? That's where that movement is coming from. It's coming from a deep seated place, a place that is ingrained in our being. It's not cultural or psychological. I mean, psychological in the in the social norms sort of way. It is a deep rooted part of our being to answer that call, because the call is always there. And
Yes.
a lot of people bury that call under a mountain of lethargy, right? Entertainment and everything else. We did a whole episode on entertainment. Part of that evil is that it buries that call, but men hear it, right? Men hear that call. And when you start answering it a little bit, the call gets louder, right? And so that modern Stoic movement is coming from that. It's the natural application. And there is a deeper supernatural aspect to it that I think we Catholics can start to listen to more frequently and try to answer on a deeper level.
You're right, and I can see it, uh, whether men admit it or not. It's there.
Mhm.
There's a real, if nothing else, call it a call to adventure, and it really is the ultimate adventure.
Yeah.
You know,
Subjugating your body is the hardest thing you'll ever do, right? And by
yes,
the way, weightlifters will tell you that. I mean, weightlifters are disciplined dudes, man. Like
yes,
they count every calorie. They have to get the exact, right amount of sleep. Like, they are very disciplined. Their discipline might sometimes be geared towards the wrong motives. Um, you
depending, sure.
I mean, just like with anything else, but that discipline is crucial, right? If you can reharness that, if you can strip away the defects in the motives, whatever those might be, and by the way, we sometimes hold two motives, and they bounce back and forth of which one's leading the ship, right? If you can
Sure.
subjugate those motives, man, that discipline is it's instrumental. It's just so valuable.
Yeah, because there's another part of this too, which is I believe God made our nature this way, and our nature is to be mission driven. In the sense of we're to provide and to protect, and part of that is to have a certain understanding that we're called to produce.
Yep.
We're called to produce internally. We're called to produce externally. But this requires, and I wouldn't exactly call it the philosophy of Stoicism, but Stoicism with a Christian bent, I
Yeah.
guess would be the way to go. It's a much better way to put it. But that understanding of training, that understanding of physical and spiritual training is
Hmm.
something I believe that we have walked away from as a society. That the fact that you should think about, even I started when we started with the show, 70% of men are overweight and obese. Uh, the pharmaceutical industry, everyone's on pills.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when you take a step back and on some level we know those pills aren't necessary and this can be corrected. Why aren't we doing that?
See, that's the whole problem, right? The more lethargic our society has become, the more unhappy we are.
Yes.
It's just a fact. It's a fact of our nature that activity is good for our well-being, and a large reason why I think it's like 1 in 10 people are on psych meds. A large
Yes.
reason for that is just
Particularly
inactivity.
women. Particularly women. Yep.
Right? It's inactivity, and that can be corrected just so easily. As far as the solution side of this, the principles here are so practical and applicable, that the sky's the limit, right? Like, just go get active. You can run. You can. when I was preparing for marriage, uh, I knew that I was going to have kids, obviously, and I knew that kids don't sleep through the night, and so I would set an alarm at 3 a.m. And I moved it to 4 a.m. eventually, but and I would wake up and I would do sit-ups and push-ups for 10 minutes or something, and then I'd go back to bed.
What a
Um,
great example. That's so cool.
I
Yeah,
mean, just like little, like get creative with it. The reality is all of our lives are so very different. I can't even begin to tell you how you should exercise, but get creative with it. Find, make little challenges for yourself.
yes,
If you're not interested in being able to lift more weights by the end of the year, right? Like if you
sure.
can't, because I wouldn't really be able to muster up an interest in that either. I don't really care how many plates I can put on, on
What
the
are you
thing.
benching?
Right. Now, some people do, and if that's the goal that keeps you going, do it. If it's not, find another goal. The
Right.
simple challenge of waking up in the middle of the night and doing, 100 push-ups or whatever, that very well could be the thing that challenges you and that creates an interest in it for you. If
Right.
it
Yep.
if it's how far you can run, how far can I make it before I'm completely winded? Whatever it is, you just have to set your own challenges. You have to set your own method. Find things to do, right? If it's donating your time and going and helping little old ladies, uh, you know, do whatever physical activities they would have to do if you weren't there.
Clean out their garage, change their light bulbs, move boxes around. Yeah, there's tons of stuff you can do. It's right in your neighborhood, right?
Yep, yep.
You know,
There's
sorry, go ahead.
always a way to find exercise. I think a lot of the reasons people don't do it though is because they haven't realized that they need to add the challenge to it, right? They need to add the call to greatness to it. Exercising for exercise sake is never gonna get there. I think that's why
No,
a lot of people have trouble beginning, is because they think they're trying to preserve their body for longevity of life. That's not the goal. That's the error that has worked its way into the health culture, right? And that isn't our point. Our point is that, just like I repeat with education or anything else, it's simply for the good of your soul. That's the point of it. And so find a way to challenge yourself and get to it.
I couldn't agree with you more. And if I could, one of the things that as I sort of, for my own path, I view it as, and I've said this before to friends of mine, I'm not looking to extend my life.
Right.
I think that's insane. What I am looking to do is to avoid a chemo drip and also to understand that I'm here to serve God and this is the best way I can do it.
Right.
And it's obvious that your quality of life, and here's the other, you touched upon a few things. People don't realize this because I find it the saddest development of modern society. M. Scott Peck wrote The Road Less Traveled, right? And he made a stunning observation. In his opinion, 30 years of clinical psychiatry, 95% of people on medication don't need it. They have a failure to face reality. Number one, and number two is find God and move your body, and watch what you're putting in. This guy, he was really pretty straightforward about this, and he was viewed as a pariah. He also said that there's evil in the world, and he was a pariah once he said that. He'd
Right.
actually taken in part of some exorcisms, I believe, with Malachi Martin, but I'm not sure. Anyway, the second part is this. What we're talking about is we're talking about this. All of our shows, all of them, point to the whole man, right?
Yep.
This is what we're talking about. We're talking about how do you interact with your family? What do you put in your body? How do you exercise? How do you relate to your wife? What is your role? How are you organizing your living space around you? Right? It really is. It's about the whole man in communion with God. Right? Here's
Yep.
the deal. Exercise is a big part of it. And you've been lied to. Our testosterone levels are dropping as men. 70% of men are obese or overweight. Here's the point. Watch what you're putting into your body. Watch your diet, number one. Number two is you can really hit this easily. Start walking. That's how you start. Instead of taking, if you're in the city and you're going to take subway, walk to a farther subway stop. Figure it out.
One thing I want to just touch on that because it's just such a good point.
Yeah.
I noticed. So some of my favorite authors, Chesterton
Yeah.
and C.S. Lewis, some of these guys, I call them sort of like philosophy commentators. They don't quite hit the level of like being philosophers, but they're just phenomenal. They're like the dumb man's philosopher. Those are my favorite guys. I have a
Great
soft spot
point. Good way to put that, man. I love that. Go. Sorry. Go.
I do. I eat them up, man. Bellick, all those guys. So one thing that they all have in common at some point, because I've read every essay, every letter they've written, they all talk about taking hours long walks.
Yeah.
That's what they did almost daily. They would literally strike out at sunrise with a notepad in their pocket, and they would walk for hours. And,
Brilliant.
you know, I got to say, it makes so much sense, right? Because the brain stops working when the body stops working, right? And as a writer, I was a writer for years. I found that I had to constantly get up and move. I had to get up and hit a heavy bag, or I had to get up, and I had this little stick that I used to pretend sword fight with in the room and, jump around.
I can see that, by the way.
Yeah, it was like a little pool cue. The simple movements. You don't have to go start stacking plates on the barbell.
No.
Thing, right? Like, just get moving. And you'll find that you feel better, and that will start a whole cycle. I think it will start a whole cycle of a positive feedback loop.
Well said. Which, by the way, if I could, this is a side note. I don't want to get on this path, but this is why school was so torturous to me as a kid. Yeah. If I couldn't get out of that seat, I was like, I felt chained. I was like, I got to get out of here. And but let me tell you this. So I loved what you said about Chesterton. And by the way, Tolkien was another one, and so was C.S. Lewis.
Yep.
I believe it was C.S. Lewis used to keep envelopes and a pen in his back pocket when he would go on these long walkabouts with his brother Warren, right? And they would just talk about everything. And he would have to stop, and he would come up with a thought, and some of his best thoughts were that way. And it was all because of the connection of mind, body, and spirit. It was like keeping that thing going. And the second thing I would say is, this is why it's so central. You need to incorporate that you're a living body, and that has to be nourished through, and I'll say exercise is a form of prayer, Bud. If you follow what I'm saying, you're as distasteful at times as it is. You're going, God, you give me these insights. So the discomfort of this, I'm laying at the foot of the cross because I'm doing this, and then you begin to like it. By the way,
if the intention is there, if the intention is there, it's absolutely a form of prayer. I mean, that's been foundational in the church from the beginning. We have always stated that, and it's been greatly lost.
Pilgrimages, right? Pilgrimages, right, Bug? I mean, that's the purpose of a pilgrimage.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And the other thing I wanted to say is because, and then I want you to give me your thoughts. I think we're excited about this. I keep running over you. I apologize, because I really believe in this stuff. I can't tell you how much it is so central to my life, and I'm so blessed. My father showed this to me. Yeah. Like I'm telling you, it was the greatest thing, man. I used to get up like I was in 6th grade. I'll never forget. I used to get up and run 3 miles with the guy. Yeah. And
my dad was a big runner.
Yeah.
My stepdad who raised me, who he's my father. I took his last name. He was always a big exercise guy. Me and him would run.
Yep.
He would spray paint little marks on the street. He would drive in the car and watch the
hash marks, right?
Yeah, and he would find the quarter mile, the half mile, the mile, and he would spray these little marks, and we would go for runs, and we would know when we hit a mile.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And those are. And by the way, again, much credit to your father and mine. Right? We didn't have the economy at the time where we would work with them all day in the field, and this was their way.
Yep.
And I'm so grateful for that. And I'd shown interest. And he was like, "Yeah, well, tomorrow morning I'm leaving. Well, at 6, so we'll go." And he was at every time. But I would say this, that it isn't necessary to join a gym. It really is simple. Walk, and I promise you, man. Like you pointed out, Bug. Not only will you love that, you will just fall in love with that. I mean, it's incredible. These are some of the greatest things that are happening. Were long walks with my daughter or friends or those kinds of things. And the other thing, man, if there's no one to go with, incorporate, because you don't want it to be disordered. Incorporate push-ups and sit-ups, like you were saying. You got up at 4 a.m. This is how you get the whole body together. This stuff is very, very important. And there's no reason not to. There really is no reason not to. What is the reason? You can miss a subway station and go one further, or get off on an earlier one if you live in this city. But what does it take to throw on a pair of sneakers after dinner or something and go take a walk, run kind of thing, or pray while you're doing this. Incorporate it into your prayer. The rosary,
Mhm.
huge, right?
Yeah.
And if
With
you're
our
alone,
family,
bang out
we
100
walk
push-ups.
around the property. That's a big thing for us. Is just going on walks to nowhere. We'll just walk around the property and we'll talk. We'll do rosary walks occasionally,
Right?
uh, and just walking because it's good because it lifts the soul.
Tell me those moments aren't magic.
Yeah,
When,
right.
when little girls, ask you questions,
Hmm.
and it's like, well, we're taking it's a real form of fellowship, and the killer is, and again, we go back to the original point. What are we doing with our time? We have to account for our time, and I'm sorry, Netflix isn't going to do it.
No, well, and that gets back to the utilitarianism of our culture, right? Um, my daughters know that I am present with them when we're walking because we're not trying to get somewhere. We're not late for a meeting. We're just walking to walk, and we stop and we talk and we look at the bugs crawling around, and it just becomes a unitive activity, for its own good sake, right? For the good of our souls, and we've got to get out of that utility mindset. Even with the physical activity, try to remove yourself from the physical, or sorry, from the utility mindset of it, right? Lifting weights to get big muscles. There's a good in the activity you're doing, but you're still taking a utility approach, right? I want to look better.
Right.
Do it because it's good for your soul.
Exactly. Which it is. I
Yep.
even heard Father Ripperger talk about that once, and he said it exactly like you said. It's like, well, you're lifting weights for vanity, or is it a good idea for self-discipline? And it's like, it's a very good idea for self-discipline. And it also, and the other thing too is service.
Mhm.
Uh, you're supposed to be protector and service to your family, and if there's an emergency and you have to carry something 5 miles, to what I mean. These are not things that these are things that happen. I remember clearly reading. I was in Europe one time and reading about a train wreck. There was a train accident in Italy, and the emergency service workers were horrified that of the physical condition of those in the train. Italian nationals. They couldn't get out of the train. They were they were just in bad physical. They couldn't lift themselves up. I mean, this is the kind of thing where we become kind of slaves to this modernity. We
Yeah.
need to understand this. Get back to basics, man. Good food, and understand you don't need to join a gym. You just need to move and get resistance exercises like push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, man, and that's it. And get
Yep.
moving, right?
That's it. That's it. And like I said, this is one that we really can't get too much into specifics on because
Sure.
everyone's life is different. But
Yes.
get creative with it. Find activity for yourself. It's out there, man. Like you know.
But to your point, help an older person who's alone cleaning out their garage. I mean,
Yeah.
you just look. There's
And
plenty
by
of
the
ways.
way, St. Thomas talks about this. He talks about the one of the primary ways to assuage sorrow is movement of the body. That's all he says, right?
Yes,
He doesn't get into specifics. It's just movement of the body. Movement of the body assuages sorrow.
I didn't
So,
know that.
so take St. Thomas's advice and go move your body.
There you go, Mr. Hall. On that note, by your leave, sir, are we wrapping this bad boy up here?
I think we ought to.
All right, Bug, as always, a great show, by the way, and thank you. Great insight. So, guys, hero's journey: eat well, move.
That's right. Very much suffer well and eat more meat.
You bet. Viva Cristo Rey. This is Jim Mona Bug Hall. We're saying goodbye from the 12th station. Thanks so much. We're honored you looked. You're watching our content. Please pass it along. Hit subscribe bell. See you, Bug.
All right.